So this happened to me last night, and I still can't shake the fear. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe writing it down will help. I had been at a friend's housewarming party. It was a great night. Good food, drinks, and lots of laughs. I lost track of time, and before I knew it, it was almost 1 a.m. I live about 20 minutes away, and while I could have called an Uber, I figured a walk would do me some good. Besides, the night was cool and calm, and I thought it would be peaceful. Big mistake. As I started my walk home, the streets were quiet. The occasional car passed by, and I enjoyed the solitude. About halfway home, I decided to take a shortcut through a small park to shave off a few minutes. The park was dimly lit, with only a few lamp posts casting weak pools of light. As I walked, I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was just another late-night walker, but the sound was off. The steps were uneven, dragging. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a figure in the distance, moving slowly but deliberately. I picked up my pace. Maybe it was just someone drunk trying to find their way home, I told myself. But the footsteps quickened, matching my speed. I looked back again, and the figure was closer. Under the dim light, I could make out a man with disheveled hair and wild eyes. He was holding something shiny, a knife. Panic surged through me. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. The man's footsteps echoed behind me, faster and faster. I darted off the path, through the trees, hoping to lose him in the darkness. "Hey, stop!" he yelled, his voice slurred and filled with madness. "I just want to talk!" Yeah, right. I weaved between the trees, branches scratching at my face and arms. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind me, muttering to himself, the knife gleaming whenever it caught the light. My lungs burned, but adrenaline kept me moving. I spotted a gap in the trees ahead, leading back to the street. Bursting out of the park, I glanced around, hoping to see someone, anyone, but the street was deserted. I ran towards the nearest house, pounding on the door and yelling for help. No one answered. The man emerged from the park, his eyes locked on me, a twisted grin on his face. "Come here, let's have a chat," he called out, brandishing the knife. I sprinted down the street, my legs feeling like jelly. I could hear his ragged breathing behind me, getting closer and closer. Desperation set in. I couldn't keep this up much longer. Suddenly, headlights appeared at the end of the street. A car was coming. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, a middle-aged woman, looked at me with wide eyes. "Help me! Please help!" I screamed. She unlocked the doors, and I threw myself into the passenger seat. "Go, go, go!" I yelled. She didn't hesitate. The car sped off just as the man reached the road, his knife raised. He shouted something unintelligible, but the words were lost in the roar of the engine. As we drove away, I looked back and saw him standing in the middle of the street, watching us with those crazed eyes until we turned the corner and he disappeared from view. The woman drove me to the nearest police station, where I filed a report. They took my statement and assured me they'd patrol the area. But even now, I can't shake the feeling of those eyes on me, the sound of his footsteps chasing me through the darkness. I'm never walking home at night again. Ever.
Hey, no sleep. I've been reading stories on here for a while, and I never thought I'd have one of my own to share. This happened recently, and I need to get it off my chest. Maybe writing it down will help me process what happened and help others avoid making the same mistake I did. So, a bit of background. I've always been fascinated by the internet, especially the darker corners of it. I spend a lot of my free time on tech forums and reading about cybersecurity. A few weeks ago, I decided to explore the dark web out of curiosity. I know. It was a dumb idea, but I was careful. I used a VPN, Tor browser, and took all the necessary precautions. At first, it was mostly what I expected. Weird forums, illegal marketplaces, and conspiracy theories. I didn't interact with anyone or buy anything. I was just browsing. But then I stumbled upon a site called The Package. The site was simple, just a black background with white text. It claimed to offer a unique service. For a small fee, they would send you a package containing a once-in-a-lifetime experience. There were no details about what was in the package, just vague promises of something unforgettable. I was intrigued. Against my better judgment, I decided to go for it. The fee was small, only about $50 worth of Bitcoin. I figured it was a small price to pay for the thrill of the unknown. I entered my details, made the payment, and promptly forgot about it. A week later, I received a small, unmarked package in the mail. My heart raced with excitement and a little bit of fear as I opened it. Inside was a single USB drive and a note that simply read, "Watch me." I hesitated for a moment, then plugged the USB drive into my laptop. There was only one file on it, a video file named watchme.mp4. I clicked on it, and the video started playing. The video was grainy, like it had been filmed on an old camcorder. It showed a dark room with a single chair in the middle. A person was tied to the chair, their face obscured by a hood. The camera zoomed in, and a distorted voice started speaking. "Welcome, participant. You have chosen to receive our package, and now you will experience something truly unique." The voice was cold and mechanical, sending shivers down my spine. The camera panned around the room, showing various instruments laid out on a table. Knives, pliers, and other tools I couldn't identify. My heart pounded as I realized what I was watching. The video cut to the person in the chair, who started struggling against their bonds. The distorted voice continued, describing in graphic detail what they were going to do to the person. I couldn't take it anymore. I yanked the USB drive out of my laptop and threw it across the room. I sat there shaking, trying to process what I had just seen. My curiosity had led me into something far darker than I had anticipated. I wanted to forget about it, but I couldn't. The image of that room and the person in the chair haunted my every thought. That night I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "You shouldn't have done that." The body of the email contained a single sentence, "We know where you live." Panic set in. I didn't know what to do. I considered going to the police, but what could I tell them? That I ordered a mysterious package from the dark web and now felt threatened? I doubted they would take me seriously. I decided to stay with a friend for a few days, hoping things would blow over. But the emails kept coming. Every day a new message would arrive, each one more threatening than the last. "You can't hide," one read. "We're coming for you," said another. After a week of this, I went back to my apartment to pick up some more clothes. As I approached the door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. My heart sank. I pushed the door open and found my apartment ransacked. Everything was torn apart, and the USB drive was gone. I called the police, but they found no evidence of who had done it. They advised me to stay somewhere else for a while and assured me they would investigate. I knew they wouldn't find anything. I've since moved to a new city and changed all my contact information. The emails have stopped, but I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. I've learned my lesson. Curiosity can lead you down dark and dangerous paths. If you ever find yourself tempted to explore the dark web, think twice. You never know what or who you might find. A few weeks ago, I decided to take a weekend trip to a cabin in the woods. I needed some time away from the constant buzz of the city, and the idea of being surrounded by nature seemed perfect. The cabin was secluded, about a 20-minute drive from the nearest town, and nestled deep within a dense forest. The first day was bliss. I spent it hiking, taking in the crisp autumn air, and enjoying the vibrant colors of the leaves. By evening, I was sitting by a roaring fire, reading a book and sipping hot cocoa. The serenity of the place was everything I had hoped for. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a noise outside. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but then it grew louder, more deliberate. I turned off the lights and peeked out the window. In the pale moonlight, I saw a figure standing just at the edge of the tree line. My heart raced. Who could possibly be out here at this hour? I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but there was no signal. Panic started to set in. I looked back out the window and the figure was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, but the unease lingered. I locked all the doors and windows, grabbed a kitchen knife, and stayed up the rest of the night, listening for any sound. The forest was eerily quiet. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I dozed off on the couch. The next morning, I found tracks outside the cabin. Human footprints leading from the woods to my front door. My blood ran cold. Someone had been watching me. I decided to cut my trip short and leave immediately. As I was packing up, I heard footsteps on the porch. I froze, gripping the knife tightly. The door handle turned slowly, and then there was a knock. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do. Summoning all my courage, I called out, "Who is it?" A man's voice replied, "Sorry to bother you. My car broke down a little ways up the road. Can I use your phone to call for help?" Something about his voice didn't sit right with me. It was too calm, too practiced. I backed away from the door and shouted, "I'm calling the police!" There was a pause, and then the voice said, "No need for that. I'll find someone else to help." I heard the footsteps retreating. I stayed inside, peeking out the window, until I saw him disappear into the woods. As soon as I felt it was safe, I grabbed my things, dashed to my car, and drove straight to the nearest town. I went to the local police station and reported what had happened. The officer listened, taking notes, but there was little they could do without more information. They promised to keep an eye on the area and suggested I stay somewhere else for the rest of my trip. A few days later, I received a call from the police. They had found an abandoned car not far from the cabin, with no sign of the owner. It matched the description of the man I had seen. They also discovered a bag in the trunk containing duct tape, rope, and a large knife. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The man wasn't just looking for help. He was prepared for something far more sinister. The officer told me they were still investigating, but I knew I had narrowly escaped something terrible. I haven't gone back to the cabin since, and I doubt I ever will. The woods, once a place of peace and solitude, now hold a darkness I can't shake. I think about that night often, and every time I shiver at the thought of what could have happened if I had opened the door. If you ever find yourself alone in the woods, trust your instincts. Some strangers are more than just lost. They're looking for something, or someone, and it might just be you.
Hi, Ari or no sleep. I never thought I'd be writing here, but something happened to me recently that I need to share. Maybe getting it out there will help me make sense of it, or at least help me sleep again. So, I live alone in a small house just outside of town. It's an older place, but it's cozy, and I've grown to love it. The house has a basement, but it's always given me the creeps, so I rarely go down there. I mostly use it for storage. A few weeks ago, I started noticing strange things around the house. At first, it was little stuff. Food missing from the fridge, lights turned on that I swore I had turned off, and doors slightly ajar that I knew I had closed. I chalked it up to my imagination, or maybe just forgetting things in my busy day-to-day life. Then, it started getting weirder. One night, I heard faint noises coming from the basement. It sounded like shuffling, almost like someone moving around. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, or maybe a raccoon that had gotten in somehow. But the noises continued. They were sporadic, sometimes happening in the middle of the night, waking me up and sending chills down my spine. I decided to set up a camera in the kitchen, just to see if I could catch anything. What I found was more disturbing than I could have ever imagined. The footage showed a figure emerging from the basement door in the middle of the night. It was a man, thin and disheveled, moving quietly through the house. He would open the fridge, take food, and then retreat back to the basement. But the worst part? The camera also caught him standing in the doorway of my bedroom, watching me sleep. My heart pounded as I watched, realizing that someone had been living in my house without me knowing, and watching me in my most vulnerable moments. I called the police immediately. They arrived quickly and searched the basement. What they found down there was chilling. There was a small makeshift bed, piles of old clothes, and food wrappers scattered around. The man was nowhere to be found, but it was clear he had been living there for some time. The police said they would patrol the area and advised me to stay with a friend for a while. I packed a bag and left, too shaken to stay another night in that house. I've been staying with a friend for the past few days, but I can't stop thinking about what happened. Who was that man? How long had he been living there? And how did he manage to go unnoticed for so long? The most terrifying part is that they never caught him. He's still out there somewhere, and I can't shake the feeling that he's watching me, waiting for me to come back. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe in that house again. I've put it up for sale and I'm looking for a new place, but the fear lingers. Every time I hear a noise, I jump, expecting to see that man's face. So, here I am, sharing my story with you all, hoping that maybe someone has experienced something similar or can offer some advice. Has anyone else found out they had an uninvited guest living in their home? How did you cope? I need to find a way to move on from this, but right now, I'm just grateful to be safe. Please, if you have any thoughts or advice, let me know. And if you live alone, check your basement. You never know who might be lurking down there.
What happened last Christmas has haunted me every night since it happened. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here will understand, or provide some help. I live in a small town where everyone knows each other. It's a quiet place, especially during the winter months. Last Christmas, my parents decided to take a vacation, leaving me alone in our house. I didn't mind. I had the place to myself and could enjoy some peace and quiet. Christmas Eve arrived, and I spent the day decorating the house, wrapping last-minute gifts, and baking cookies. It was late when I finally finished, and I decided to relax with a cup of hot cocoa and a Christmas movie. The snow was falling gently outside, and everything seemed perfect. Around midnight, I heard a knock at the door. It was strange, because we rarely get visitors, especially so late. I hesitated for a moment before getting up to answer it. When I opened the door, I found a man standing there, shivering in the cold. He was maybe 40 years old, tall and thin, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were worn and dirty, and his eyes had a wild, desperate look. He smiled at me, revealing a set of crooked teeth. "Good evening," he said, his voice raspy. "I'm sorry to bother you on Christmas Eve, but my car broke down and I'm freezing. Could I come in and use your phone to call for help?" Something about him felt off, but it was Christmas Eve, and I didn't want to be unkind. I stepped aside and let him in. He thanked me and walked into the living room, glancing around as if assessing the place. I handed him my phone, and he pretended to make a call. After a few moments, he handed it back to me with a sigh. "No answer," he said. "Do you mind if I warm up here for a bit?" I nodded, trying to hide my unease. "Sure, but just for a little while." He sat down on the couch and accepted a cup of hot cocoa. We made small talk, but his eyes kept darting around the room,
and his smile never quite reached his eyes. I tried to keep the conversation light, but my anxiety was growing. After a while, he started asking strange questions. "Do you live here alone?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes piercing. "My parents are upstairs asleep," I lied, hoping it would deter him from any ideas he might have. He just nodded, his smile widening. "It's a lovely house. Lots of places to hide presents, I bet." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, I guess so." The clock struck midnight, and he suddenly stood up. "Thank you for the cocoa," he said, his smile fading. "I should be going now." Relieved, I walked him to the door and watched as he disappeared into the snowy night. I locked the door behind him and let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I checked the windows and doors, making sure everything was secure, before heading to bed. I had just started to drift off when I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the window. My heart raced as I listened, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. But the tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed to the window. Peeking through the curtain, I saw the man standing outside, his face pressed against the glass, his breath fogging up the window. He was muttering something, but I couldn't make out the words. My blood ran cold as he started banging on the window, his voice growing louder and more frantic. "Let me in. I know you're alone. I just want to talk." I stumbled back, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. The operator answered, and I quickly explained what was happening. They assured me that officers were on their way and told me to stay on the line. The man's shouts grew more desperate. "You can't ignore me! Let me in, or I'll break the door down!" I could hear the sound of sirens in the distance, but it felt like an eternity before they arrived. The man continued banging on the window, shouting threats and demands. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt like I was going to pass out from fear. Finally, the police arrived, their flashing lights illuminating the snow-covered yard. The man saw them and ran off into the night, disappearing into the darkness. The officers searched the area but couldn't find him. They took my statement and assured me they would patrol the neighborhood. I spent the rest of the night at a friend's house, too terrified to stay in my own home. The police never caught the man, and I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, waiting for another opportunity. Every night, I double-check all the locks and windows, but the fear remains. If you ever find yourself alone on a cold winter night, be careful who you let in. You never know who might be lurking outside, waiting for a chance to strike.
Oh, golly, gosh, that was terrifying. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe for more underwear-filling content.